everyone, Jay's Night Numbers here, and welcome back to another episode of the Political Freedom Fighters Podcast. In this episode, I have with you all here today a libertarian who is running for NC State Senate District 18. And with that being said, I want to introduce to all of you Mr. Brad Hessel. How are you, sir?
Greetings, James. Can't complain. Another beautiful day in paradise here in Raleigh, North Carolina.
That is good to hear. So, I guess my first question is, who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Brad Hessel, and I am an IT warrior, I guess. Been working with knowledge management technology for a while, maybe 30 years or so. I moved down here in 92. The company that I was working for up in New York City made the determination that it would make sense to move to North Carolina because there were all these, they needed consultants and they needed programmers, and all these people were graduating from NC State and also to some extent from Duke and Chapel Hill. And so also, I think this was probably a factor. The CEO was really big into golf, and he really liked the fact that if he moved down here, he could like roll out of his office and into the course on foot, basically, as opposed to having to take a train back to Greenwich, Connecticut from Manhattan. So it was much more convenient. So anyway, we ended up down in North Carolina, and then I worked for them for a few years. They had some issues with the internet, and didn't quite make the transition so ably. So I went out on my own with a knowledge management consulting practice, and that's basically who I am and how I got to North Carolina.
That is awesome. You talked a little bit about your history, so I guess let's go into it.
Well, what are you looking for specifically? You want my political background?
Either personal, political, or both. Whatever you want.
All right. Well, so politically, I started out as a Peace Democrat, working for George McGovern in 1971-72. And of course, that was not a very successful campaign. He lost every single state in the election except for Massachusetts. And I think he won DC also. And I stuck with the Democrats. So I was really not happy with the idea of going around the world and enforcing our standards on other people. I didn't think that was the right way to go. And the Democrats, I thought, were more into seeing things that way. I'm not so sure that's really true now today, but in any event, then I began to get a little unhappy with the way the Democrats were kind of dividing everybody up into these discrete groups and having quotas for how many left-handed Puerto Ricans needed to be in the delegation and all that kind of stuff. And I guess about in 1980, I did not vote for either of the major party candidates. I think I wrote in Eugene McCarthy 1980. I guess it was John Anderson was running as a third party, but I voted for him. And then in 84, I was just totally fed up with the Democrats. And at that point, I was paying taxes. And the Democrats seemed like they were spending money like crazy. So I was impressed with Ronald Reagan's interest in making economic stuff work better for people. And so I voted for him in 84. And then, of course, Reagan proceeded to spend more money than the Democrats had and increased our deficit even more than they had when they were in power. And then I kind of started having kids, and we ended up moving to North Carolina. That kind of distracted me for a while. I wasn't really very politically active. And then in I think it was 2000, 2001, when we started invading all those countries under Republicans. Now I wasn't happy with the Republicans. So I finally just became an independent. And I don't know if you were aware of this, but independents in North Carolina, when I moved here in 1992, independents amounted to 8% of the electorate. And they have been growing by leaps and bounds. And there was 92% of the electorate were Democrats and Republicans, 8% were independents in 92. Today, there are more independent voters in North Carolina by far than either Democrats or Republicans. It's about 39% are independents, up from 8%. And the Democrats and the Republicans are each around 30%. They're pretty close to even. And then there's about 1% that are other things, such as libertarians, a few Green Party folks. And so I was part of a wave. I didn't realize it then, but I was a part of a wave of people that weren't really happy with either party. So then, 2008, now most of the kids are out of the house, and I'm really starting to pay a little bit more attention to politics. Actually, I think it was 2007. My brother-in-law calls me up. He's in Baltimore, my wife's older brother, and he's kind of not a socialist Democrat, but like pretty far to the left, a very, very progressive Democrat. So he says, "Brad, you got to turn on the TV and watch the Republican debates." And I said, "Ralph, it's 2007. The election is not till next year. Why are you watching the debates, and why are you watching the Republicans?" He says, "There's this guy. He's like driving them crazy. You got to turn it on." So I turn on the TV, and there is Ron Paul attempting to explain to Rudy Giuliani the concept of blowback. The idea that if you constantly overthrowing governments and putting autocrats in power that have secret police and put people in jail and torture them and basically make sweetheart deals with oil companies, and you're probably going to upset some of the people that live there. They aren't going to be happy with that. And so they were talking about 9/11. And so Ron Paul was basically saying, well, it's not surprising that they attacked us. We've been treating them so badly for 40 years, 50 years. And poor Rudy Giuliani is like, head explodes. "I was there at 9/11, and I've heard some crazy ideas about what was motivating those folks, but this is the nuttiest thing I've ever heard." He just didn't get it at all. So Ron Paul continues, and he talks about the deficits and how horrible those are. And he talks about the drug war and how insane it is to try prohibition. Again, we already tried it in the 20s with alcohol, and it didn't work then. And all it did was create a vast criminal enterprise, a black market. And of course, that's what's happening now. It's even worse now than it was in the 20s. Destabilizing all those countries to the south of us and causing it to be hard to live down there, and encouraging people to migrate to the north to get away from the problems that we have created. It's just anyway. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. But in any event, everything Ron Paul said made a lot of sense. So I actually sent him some money in 2008, and then in 2012, I worked for him here in North Carolina. And after the Republican convention, when they wouldn't even let him speak, even though he had the second most delegates of anybody, it was kind of a natural progression for me to move over and work for Gary Johnson, who had started out running for the Republican nomination, but also had been frozen out of the debates there, and had moved over to running for the Libertarian nomination and had won it by that time. And there were actually many of us who were in the Ron Paul organization that moved over to work for Gary Johnson in 2012. So that's kind of how I got recruited to being libertarian. I didn't actually register libertarian until after that election. I think it was late 2012, early 2013. And, I realized in retrospect, I've always been a libertarian. I mean, who doesn't agree with, our two rules, like don't hit people, don't steal their stuff. I guess psychopaths maybe don't agree with that, but there aren't that many psychopaths. So, although a lot of them seem to be in politics. So anyway, that's how I got to being a libertarian.
That is awesome. So why are you running for NC State Senate District 18?
Well, specifically, I got started running. I became the chair of the Wake County Party, or the treasurer of the Wake County Party, which was kind of weird. It was only my second meeting I'd ever gone there, and it was their annual meeting. It was at NC State in a classroom, and I don't really even understand today how this happened, but somehow I came out of this second meeting I'd ever been at. Their treasurer was moving to Oakland, and they were desperate for somebody, so I guess that's why I was qualified technically to do it, but and they weren't really very active back in 2013. This was early 2013. I think they'd raised like a total of $100 or $200 the previous year, and so we started working to fix that a bit. And also they hadn't run very many candidates. In fact, they had run no candidates for North Carolina General Assembly. We had 16 seats in the North Carolina General Assembly in Wake County in 2016. It was the first year I was actively recruiting, which is, the most of any county except for Mecklenburg. We're tied with Mecklenburg. Both of us are the largest population-wise, which is why we have so many seats. So that's a lot of candidates to, just conjure up from zero. They had run zero. Wake County had run zero in 2012 and zero in 2014. I think there was one candidate for NC Senate in 2010. So I didn't have a big pool, of veterans to pull on. So I've spent a lot of time calling people and, explaining why it was important to give folks another choice besides the Democrats and Republicans. And you have that conversation a lot of times. I don't know, James, have you ever coached a youth sports team?
I have not.
Okay, well, you can imagine, right? It's like 40 degrees, 38 degrees, and the kids are out on the soccer field running around in their shorts, right? And, you can't be on the sideline as the coach, in a parka, right? You can't be asking folks to do something you're not willing to do yourself. So I think I had recruited at the height, I had about 11 of those 16 seats covered. But as we got closer to the deadline for filing, wives decided that they didn't want their husbands to expose themselves to, political stuff, and bosses decided they didn't want their employees to, be out there politically. And one guy was moving out of the county and wouldn't be eligible. And so I guess it was the week before we had to file. And the guy, I had recruited somebody in my personal district, both for House and for Senate, two different people. So the Senate guy calls me up and he says, Brad, I'm sorry, but I've just been promoted and I'm going to be totally absorbed with doing all this work. There's no way I can possibly run for office. So I'm going to have to pull out. And, I'd made that speech to like these 50 people. I would have felt kind of hypocritical if I weren't willing to pick up the gauntlet in my own district. So I registered to run for Senate, having no plan or idea what I was going to do. And so that's kind of how I got in it. I got dragooned into it. But I do have another motivation. And really over the last few years, this has gotten so bad with the general atmosphere of partisan vitriol, and with respect to libertarians, we really try to focus on solutions for serious problems, like how do you get a healthcare system that's affordable? How do you improve education? How do you get the economy working? For all of us, not just a few people. And there isn't much discussion of that, because they're typically with the establishment parties, they're so busy insulting each other and at sometimes even insulting their opponents' supporters, just to kind of raise the temperature and get their own supporters up in arms and be sure they'll turn out. It was not like that when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. There were certainly partisan divides and issues, but folks really did discuss more seriously, and I think really try to solve problems more seriously than is happening now. So that was a motivation as well. And so I have run for this office. It was actually Senate 15 in 2016, but we redistricted like 6 times between 2010 and 2020 between the court ruling some stuff unconstitutional and the legislature coming back with new plans. And so they changed us from between 2016 and 2018, they changed us to District 18. And I ran against the same guy. Both of us were redistricted out of our old 15 into the new 18 in 2018. So I ran in 2016 and 2018. And then I was successful at recruiting people for a while. And then in 2024, I ran again, and this is my fourth time running for this particular office. So that's basically how it happened and what my motivation for running is.
Alrighty, that's awesome to hear. My next question for you is, what are your thoughts on the major parties?
Well, in 2024, we were up to 19 seats now in Wake County because we had a good 10 years between 2010 and 2020. All of North Carolina did, in fact, too. We gained another seat in the U.S. House, and Wake County grew faster than other places in North Carolina, so we gained additional seats. And the Republicans, Wake County is pretty blue, and the Republicans in 2024 only ran 10 candidates for those 19 seats. They had 9 seats where they didn't bother to field a candidate. We had 14 candidates for those 19 seats. So I don't know who's the major party and who's the third party there. Basically, my concern with the Republicans and the Democrats, and this isn't necessarily their fault, although I guess theoretically they could behave differently, but we've kind of fallen into this pattern of partisanship for a variety of reasons. And one of the worst is gerrymandering, and electoral reform is one of my major issues. I mean, I do have solutions for healthcare issues and education issues and the economy, but I'm talking a lot about electoral reform and gerrymandering. Has been around for like ever. Political gerrymandering. The Democrats did it for decades and decades until the Republicans took over here in North Carolina in 2011, and now the Republicans do it. But it's actually worse now than it ever was for a variety of reasons. One reason is because, there's always an incentive to protect your incumbents, and both parties kind of collude to some extent in doing that, regardless of who's in power. But of course, whoever is in power wants the 70% share of the 50-50 electorate, as opposed or the number of seats they win, and so gerrymandering is worse in part because when the Democrats were doing it, the split was something like 65-35, let's say. And so the Democrats were gerrymandering, so they would get like 85% of the seats, even though they only had 65% of the voters. But the thing is, even if that were fixed and it were fair, the Democrats still would have been in control 65-35 for most of those years. And so the difference in terms of the gerrymandered legislature and the non-gerrymandered legislature really wouldn't have made a huge difference in terms of the outcomes politically, because the Democrats still would have been in control. Now, though, it's like I mentioned, about 50-50 between the Democrats and Republicans. And so the Republicans are still getting 70% of the seats. And in part, that's because the tools, partly it's my fault, right? The IT tools for doing gerrymandering are a lot more powerful now. You can really slice and dice voters much more effectively than you could by hand in the old days. So they're more capable of optimizing it to get the most number of districts, regardless of what the split actually is. So that's part of the problem. But like they did a 70-30 split now when the actual split is 50-50. There you're talking about a huge political difference, because if they have a majority, and especially if they have a supermajority where they can override a veto of the governor, that makes a big difference politically. So the difference between a fair split, which would be close to 50-50, and the 70-30 that we actually have is much more significant than it was when the Democrats were in control. So that's one reason why it's worse. And the other reason I kind of touched on is because the tools are better. So you can do a more extreme job with gerrymandering. So that's my top priority. But I realize that I'm just kind of, it's kind of like a Don Quixote campaign, because it doesn't matter who's in control, even if the Democrats took control again. When the Democrats were in control, the Republicans had a great proposal for a nonpartisan committee that would do the redistricting. And the Democrats wouldn't. They introduced it as a bill, but the Democrats wouldn't even let it go to committee, let alone have a hearing, let alone be voted on. And Phil Berger, actually, if I remember correctly, was one of the authors of that bill, or at least one of the sponsors of that bill. I don't know if he actually wrote it. So then in 2010, the Republicans won the election, and they took control in 2011. And the Democrats introduced almost the identical bill that the Republicans had introduced, right, with a nonpartisan commission to do redistricting. But suddenly the Republicans had lost interest in their own proposal. Amazingly, now that they were in control, right, didn't look so great. And once again, the bill, never made it into a committee, let alone have a hearing, let alone have a vote. So, I don't have a lot of hope that, regardless of which party is in power, that we're going to make a lot of progress on gerrymandering. But it is an important issue, and it hurts us because it disenfranchises so many voters. Like if you're, in a 70-30 county, basically the 30% that are the minority might as well not show up because their candidate has no chance to win. And in fact, over half of the voters in the 70% group might as well not bother to show up because their candidate only needs 30% or 31% to have a plurality to win the election. So none, like 2/3 of the electorate might as well not be voting. It's just it's not a but if the districts were drawn so that it wasn't so one-sided in every district, then there would be more competition, and more people's votes would really matter. Also, you have this other effect of where even the major parties, particularly the Republicans, are probably worse at this than the Democrats, don't even put candidates up in a lot of districts where it's one-sided against them. So you basically, if there weren't a libertarian there, and there often isn't, you have like the Soviet Union where there's like one candidate on the ballot. I mean, how is that a healthy democracy, right? And also the other thing that happens is that in those one-sided districts, there's a primary election that's actually the deciding election, because whoever wins the primary in the majority party is almost certain to win the election in November. It doesn't really matter who the other party puts up. So what happens in the primary, where, as you probably know, many fewer voters show up, it's only those that are really motivated typically will show up at a primary. And who's motivated? Well, on the Republican side, it's the MAGA folks, and on the Democratic side, it's the socialist left-wing folks. And so if you want to win one of those primaries as a Democrat or a Republican, you have to run way to the right if you're a Republican and way to the left if you're a Democrat, to have a chance of winning that primary. So as a consequence, we get folks elected who are not particularly interested in compromise and in actually working together with the other side to come up with solutions to problems. They're more interested in performative politics and being the most clever at coming up with insulting nicknames for their opponents and tweeting them out on X or whatever. So it's really not a healthy situation. And if we did have somehow we could draw fairer districts and have more competition, it would definitely be better. So that's my take on the Democrats and the Republicans, and it is a problem. I do, however, I am proposing something that I think would help, and that is, are you familiar with the Problem Solvers Caucus in the U.S. Congress, James?
I've heard about them.
Okay. Well, what it is a group of Democrats and Republicans split approximately 50-50, and they get together and talk about problems, talk about issues that are reasonably amenable to potentially being solved with some reasonable compromises on both sides, and attempt to advance that ball. And they're just in the House, and they've been around about 10 years, I believe. That they haven't had a lot of electoral success, and of course, like none in the last 2 years. It's been hopeless. However, they have had some success in promoting process reforms in the House. Things like allowing more time for members to read bills. We have these huge bills that come down, and this happens in the North Carolina General Assembly also. And you have no time to look at them before you have to vote on them. I mean, or any real opportunity to participate in creating the bills. That's actually a worse problem here in North Carolina, I think, even in the Congress, which is saying a lot because it's bad in the Congress. So um, I would like to establish something like that here in North Carolina, and I think it should be bicameral. In our situation, I think the caucus should be both House and Senate together, people from both the House and the Senate. We do have two people in our U.S. Congress delegation who are on the or in the Problem Solvers Caucus in the U.S. Congress. Don Davis in District 1 and Chuck Edwards. I think he's in District 9. I can't remember. He's a Republican and Don Davis is a Democrat. So there are folks in North Carolina, who think this is a good idea. And I'm hoping to work with my Democratic and Republican opponents to get them to come on board with this idea. So whichever one of us win, and realistically, it'll probably be one of them, to pledge to try to implement this in the North Carolina General Assembly.
Alrighty. What's your thoughts on the Democratic incumbent, Hasib Fahmy? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I actually have not met him. It's only been a couple of weeks since he was appointed to replace Terrence Everett, who was the incumbent and my opponent in 2024. Terrence Everett won election in a very close race. He won by 126 votes out of 100,000 plus votes total that were cast. I had over 3,000 votes, so that quite possibly could have made the difference in that election. So anyway, I have had a chance to meet with Chris Stock, my Republican opponent, but I haven't had a chance to meet with Hasib yet. I'm hoping to have lunch with him soon. So actually, it's a premature question. I don't know much about him. He was a newly elected Board of Commissioner for Wake Forest, and I don't know if he had run for anything before. I don't believe Chris Stock has run for anything before. So both of my opponents are relatively newcomers to politics in North Carolina.
All right. Since we're on the topic of Chris Stock, what do you think about him?
Well, he actually invited me to lunch, and we had a very pleasant conversation. And I believe that he is going to come on board. We really haven't done anything about it yet because we were trying to get Terrence to come on board, and Terrence wasn't responding to us, and now we know why, because he was planning to leave. So I believe that, though, that it's likely that he will support this idea, which would be great. And if we can get Hasib on board, then I think that would be something that would attract some attention, where all three candidates running, competing against each other, are in agreement on something, and something that would be a practical improvement, potentially a practical improvement for North Carolina. So we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Alrighty, fair enough. So, with that being said, let's go over your platform. Luckily, I was able to pull up your website, and I guess first thing I'll go over is electoral reform, which you got 3, which is nice. First, we're going to go over electoral reform for independent voters, and I'll go over through each section of your priorities one at a time. And yeah, okay. First, we're going to go over this first part of your electoral reform independent voter section. Banning independents from serving on boards of elections is unfair to them and bad for all of us. Yes, I agree. Electoral matters are governed by the North Carolina State Board of Elections, and in each of the 100 counties, a local board of elections, each with 5 members in total. That is 505 people who make important decisions about elections, including the calendar for early voting and voting locations for precincts, approving voting machines, collecting and reviewing campaign finance reports, determining what types of photo IDs can be used to vote, resolving voting and candidate eligibility issues, and certifying elections. Given their 39% share of the overall voter population, we might reasonably expect to see some 190 to 200 independents serving on the boards of elections. In fact, not a single one of those 505 people is an independent voter. They are all Democrats and Republicans. It's literally against the law to appoint an independent voter to serve on the state board of elections. Boo! Theoretically, independents can serve on county election boards, but none are ever appointed. so the largest group of voters would have no say in administrating our elections. This is manifestly unfair to them, but it's also bad for all of us. That is so true. Under current law, with 5 member boards consisting of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, with the chairs appointed by the state auditor, having no independence means partisan disputes. Yeah, we've seen that in the past few years. Will invariably be resolved in the favor of whichever party the auditor belongs to, regardless of what the best policy solution might be.
Boy, I don't even need to be here. Good job, James. I appreciate that. Yes, well, as you know, we talked about before, independents now are the largest group of voters in North Carolina, and in some respects, they have a good deal. For example, the fact that independent voters in North Carolina can vote in a partisan election, in a partisan primary, that is a good thing. You can't do that in every state, and it used to be that the parties had the option of freezing them out and saying that they wanted to have just Republicans or just Democrats make those choices, or libertarians. I think it was about 3 or 4 years back that rule was changed, and now the parties do not have that option. They have to allow independents to vote in their primaries, and I think that's a great thing to potentially see how well a candidate appeals to people beyond just the base. It hasn't, to be honest, so far anyway, it really hasn't had a lot of effect in moderating the tenor of our elections. They're still pretty partisan and tend to be kind of nasty, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Now, another thing with independence is that if you want to run for office and you're an independent, that's an issue, right? So, I want to run for state senate, and I'm a libertarian. I'm a registered libertarian. I go down to the Wake County Board of Elections during the filing period, and I take my checkbook and I write a check for $139 and I don't remember exactly 37 cents, let's say, and bang, I'm on the ballot. I mean, if there are another libertarian registers to run for that same office, I'll have to be in a primary to determine which one of us advances to the general. But there'll certainly be a libertarian on the ballot in November because one of us is going to make it. And libertarians very rarely have primaries, so it's pretty certain for me. In this case, in Senate 18, my Republican opponent did have my Republican opponent, Chris Stock, had a competing Republican running against him in the primary. He won that election pretty easily. Terrence Everett did not have an opponent, so he, like me, automatically made it to November, although now he's been replaced by a C. Fought me. So point being, for us, it's all, just writing that check. But let's say you lived in Wake County and you wanted to run for office, and you wanted to run, in my district, let's say, you want to run for Senate 18, and let's say you're an independent. Are you an independent, by the way?
I am.
Perfect. Congratulations. Good job on becoming the plurality. However, I'm sorry to say that the Wake County Board of Elections is not going to take your check unless you also come with a petition signed by hundreds or thousands of voters in this district that support you being on the ballot. So there's this extra requirement only for independents. Now, this is true in partisan races, not in nonpartisan races. If you wanted to run for city council in Raleigh, for example, that would be okay. If you're an independent, you can do that without having to get signatures. But if you want to run for any partisan office, again, you've got to satisfy this signature requirement. So it's 2026 now. So we've had, I guess, 13 cycles. We're in our 13th cycle of elections for U.S. Congress. And I think we had 12 or 13 seats back in the 2000s. Maybe it was 12 seats in the 2000s, 13 seats in the 2010s, and now we're up to 14 seats. So that's a lot of elections, right? So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of individual elections hundreds of elections for U.S. Congress, and more hundreds, at least twice that number of candidates, right, for Democrats and Republicans. It's not quite, maybe double, because as I mentioned, sometimes the Democrats or Republicans won't run a candidate in a lopsided district, but usually for the U.S. House districts, they're pretty good about running a candidate everywhere. So here's my question to you, knowing that independents amount to almost 40% of the electorate. How many independents do you imagine have run for U.S. Congress and been on the ballot in November in all of those many elections that we've had since 2002?
1.
Well, you're politically connected, so you know the answer. The answer is 1. Yes, we had Shalane Etchison in 2024, the only person running as an independent who has ever succeeded in gathering enough signatures to make it onto the ballot. So 40% of the electorate and one candidate out of, let's say, 250, right? What's wrong with this picture? I mean, arguably Democrats and Republicans are a little bit more interested in politics than people that register as independents. So you probably wouldn't expect it to be 40% of the candidates to be independent, but you would certainly expect it to be, let's say, 20%. So 20% of 200 candidates would be like 40 candidates, not one. So clearly this unreasonable and unfair impediment that doesn't apply to libertarians or Democrats or Republicans or Green Party people has to go. So that's another element of fairness for independents.
Agreed. Effectively barring independents from running for partisan offices is unfair to them and restricts choices for all of us. Unlike Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and Greens, who merely have to pay a fee, independents cannot file to run for office in partisan races unless they first submit petitions.
James, I'm going to stop you because that's pretty much what we just talked about, so I don't think we need to repeat that.
All right, fair enough. Okay, let's go to electoral reform, gerrymandering.
Already talked about that too.
All right, fair enough. Okay, let's talk about instant runoff voting.
Instant runoff voting. Now, there is a potential reform that I think is achievable in North Carolina. So instant runoff voting is basically, what we have now in North Carolina is plurality voting, right? You go into the voting booth, and next to each office is a list of people, and next to each person is an oval. And you pick the person you like the best, or in some cases, if it's like maybe two people can be elected for county commissioner out of however many are running, you pick 2 and you write in, you fill in 2 ovals. And so they count up all of the ovals that are filled in for each candidate, and whoever gets the most ovals wins, right? You don't need 50%. Donald Trump, for example, has run for president 3 times in North Carolina, and he's won all 3 times, right? However, 2 of those 3 times, he did not get a majority. He got more people voted against him than voted for him those 2 times, but he won anyway because he had more filled out ovals than anybody else. That's the way the system works. Now, that's not a terrible example because he probably, even if we'd had instant runoff voting, he probably would have won. The way instant runoff voting works is instead of filling out ovals, you write a number by each candidate, ranking them in order of preference. So we had, I believe it was 6 people on the ballot for president in 2024. So you could rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 6. You don't have to rank them all. You can rank just 3 of them or just 1 of them if you want. That would be, you put a number 1 by 1 and nothing by any of the others. And so what the vote counters do is they count up the total number of number 1 votes of everyone who ranked somebody number 1. And if one of the 6 candidates gets 50% plus 1, that's the end. And they win. They've won a majority. However, if nobody gets 50% plus 1, they don't just automatically make the person with the most number 1s the winner. Instead, what they do is they look and see who got the least number 1 votes. And that candidate is eliminated. And they look at those ballots, and for all those ballots, they look to see who the voter picked as their number 2 choice, assuming the voter, picked a number 2 choice. Like I said, you don't have to pick a number 2 choice, but most voters would at least pick a second choice. And they reallocate those votes to the candidate that those voters picked second. Now, they count up all the 1s and appropriate 2s and see if somebody has 50% plus 1. And if so, that person is now elected. If not, then they go to the 5th place finisher, the last place finisher. Now, if there's only 5 candidates, and eliminate that person and reallocate those votes. And they keep going until one candidate gets 50% plus 1. So with instant runoff voting, you cannot win without a majority, right? So this is an important thing to think about from the point of view of being a candidate, because if you need to get eventually a majority, you don't necessarily need on the first round, but you need, if you don't make it on the first round, you want to have people that have picked you second or third, so that as other folks are eliminated, you will inherit those votes and push you up towards 50%. So it gives you an incentive as a candidate to reach out beyond your base, right? If you're only talking to the left-wing socialist Democrats, if you're a Democrat, or the MAGA Republicans, so that's like, 35, 40% of the electorate, that strategy might work in a plurality system because you don't need 50%, right? You just need more votes than anybody else. And you're going to pick up, some of the independents no matter what. So you're going to do better than, if you have a 40% base, you're going to do better than 40%. And that's in fact what happened with Donald Trump in the 2 times that he won without a majority. But if you need a majority, then you've got to be thinking about, how can I encourage more people to put me down as number 2? And insulting all of your opponent's supporters is probably not the best strategy for getting number 2 or number 3 votes. So it would encourage candidates to be more moderate and to reach out beyond their bases, which is one of the dynamics that hurts us in terms of promoting partisanship right now. So I like it for that reason. I also like it because it allows voters to vote for the person that they like best, they want the most, without worrying about wasting their vote, right? Like, if you vote for a candidate, I'm not going to win in my election, most likely. If they tell me on November 4th that I've got more votes than either of my 2 opponents, I might be the first winning candidate in North Carolina history to demand a recount. But if you wanted to vote, if you liked my ideas and you want to promote my ideas and you want people to know that there's support for my ideas, if we were using ranked choice voting, you could vote for me. And if one of my 2 opponents gets 50% plus 1, it wouldn't have mattered whether you voted for me or not. That was going to happen anyway. So you haven't wasted your vote in that scenario. And lo and behold, let's say nobody gets a majority. That's what happened in my race in 2024. Terrence Everett won, but he did not get a majority because I had way more votes than 126 vote margin. So he had like 48% or something like that. So if we'd had instant runoff voting, I would have been eliminated and my votes would have been reallocated. And whoever got more of my votes, whoever had appealed to my voters better between those 2 guys, would probably have won that election. So if you're a voter and you don't have to worry about voting for me, because if there is a second round and I'm eliminated, you're still going to have a choice in how it comes out, assuming you've picked a second choice. Of course, you do have to pick a second choice for that to work. So it's better for voters, and I think it's better for candidates in the sense that it's more healthy. You get candidates that are incentivized to be more moderate and reaching out more. Now, realistically, the North Carolina General Assembly, regardless of who's in control, their incentive is not to rock the vote, right? I mean, the Republicans are very happy right now. They've got their supermajority, and they're not going to implement ranked choice voting for statewide elections or for North Carolina General Assembly elections anytime soon. I appreciate that. However, we do have a situation in North Carolina with municipal and county elections where there are many elections where you don't get a majority, and yet someone is elected, with a minority of voters vote for that person, they nevertheless get elected. Ranked choice voting would address that. And also, municipalities and counties are the ones that actually pay if you have to have a runoff election. And a runoff election, which is even worse than a primary in terms of turnout, typically if you get 10% of the voters to come out for a runoff, that's a lot in North Carolina. So they're not very popular with voters, and they're certainly not having an election decided by when only 10% of the voters come out is probably not really very healthy, right, in terms of running a democracy. But with instant runoff voting, you eliminate the need to have a separate physical runoff election. It never happens because the elections are decided based on the votes that are made on election day, or with early voting or before election day in that one election. So and running one of those runoff elections is not cheaper, even though you only get 10% of the voters turning out. It's just as expensive because you still need all the voting machines, and you still need all the staff, and you still need to go through the process of counting and all that stuff. Yeah, it's a little faster to count because there's fewer votes, but it's not a significant difference in terms of cost. So municipalities and counties are paying for these runoff elections that are unpopular, don't really work well in the sense that you don't get people participating in them, and are expensive. We could eliminate those if we implemented instant runoff voting for counties and municipal elections, right? So what I would like to see is for the North Carolina General Assembly, we live in what's known as a Dillon rule state, meaning that the counties and municipalities can only do what the state allows them to do. They have to get permission. So right now, instant runoff voting is not an option, but it could be made an option. So we're not forcing it on anybody, right? But if a county and or a municipality decides they want to run their elections using instant runoff voting, then I think they should be allowed to. So that's the general reform that I'm proposing with respect to instant runoff voting. Now, I will say one other thing, which is that North Carolina actually is a pioneer in IRV, right? We actually experimented with instant runoff voting in the early part of the century, the first decade of the century. For several years, we had an experiment where it was run in a couple of municipalities. It was run right here in Wake County in Cary, and it was run in Henderson County in Hendersonville, which is the county seat of Henderson County, which is out west a ways. And back in those days, the way that you adjudicated the elections, it was all had to be done by hand. There was no support. The voting machines did not support the technology or the process of instant runoff voting in any way, shape, or form. And those of us in Wake County are aware the ballots in Wake County tend to be pretty complex and long, and so the Wake County Board of Elections was not very enthusiastic about doing instant runoff voting, and after one cycle, the kibosh was put on it. It was not tried again after that one cycle. However, they polled the voters, and the voters loved it in Cary. And the same thing happened in Hendersonville. The voters loved it. And in Henderson, where they don't have such complex ballots to deal with, they kept it for, I think it was for 3 or 4 cycles, which was as long as the experiment lasted. So it was very popular there. And in fact, it's now in use many places in the United States. It wasn't back in 2008, 2010 when we were trying it. We were, like I mentioned, pioneers. There were a few places that used it, but now there's many. New York City uses it for their primaries. Virginia uses it for their primaries also, for statewide primaries. It's used in Maine and in Alaska for federal elections. It's used in San Francisco. There are many places that are utilizing it. And the technology, as you might imagine, has gotten a lot better. And voting machines now will support doing a lot of the counting. So it would, it's a lot easier to administer something like that. So basically, that is something that I think would help us in North Carolina. It would save money. It would make our elections fairer, and it would encourage candidates at the local levels, at least, where they do tend to be a little bit less partisan anyway, to focus on solving problems and addressing problems rather than insulting their opponents and running hyper-partisan elections. So that's where I'm at with ranked choice voting. With instant runoff voting. It's called ranked choice voting outside of North Carolina. We've always called it instant runoff voting here. So.
All right. Next up, cost-effective conservation.
Right. Well, libertarians generally approach things from the point of view that we have erred historically, and I don't want to go into great detail on this, but when the country started out, there was much more power reserved for the states and localities, and less for the federal government. But as time has gone on, we have asked the federal government to do more and more and more. I mean, originally the federal government was focused on doing basically three things, right? They were to provide for the common defense, which was really important. The Brits were out to get us. They attacked us again in 1812. Um, and to provide a sound currency so that we could all transact business as a nation, and to protect individual rights. And they did those three things like really well. But, since then, we've thrown on all manner of other things in terms of managing the money supply and setting interest rates and picking winners and losers in industry, and taxing. Lots of revenue has been raised and lots of money is spent. Of course, we have this huge military, which we didn't originally have. We had a military, and obviously we were able to win those wars, War for Independence, and again in 1812, without having a gigantic standing army. But nowadays we do. And the problem is that if you attempt to have the government make decisions and regulate things, you create an incentive for corporations in their own self-defense, because these regulations could affect them, to influence how those come out. And it's kind of like a one-stop shop. They only have to go to the federal government and get a regulation to come out, or a piece of legislation to come out that favors them. And it's just one place. They don't have to deal with a hodgepodge of different localities. So it's very convenient actually for the corporations. So unfortunately, you end up with moneyed influence having sway over how those government decisions come out, and this certainly affects conservation and environmental situations. The kind of model that we like to see is some of the stuff that's happening, for example, in Africa with respect to animal preserves, where the local folks are essentially given the responsibility for managing and maintaining those. And they have the incentive to do that because they're huge tourist attractions, and in a lot of the cases, the tourist money is significant in those economies. And of course, they also get jobs out of it. Not all of them. I mean, some people get jobs out of it. So it's kind of like a virtuous circle as opposed to a vicious circle in terms of giving people incentive to maintain high environmental standards and make sure that those preserves are maintained and the animals are safeguarded. So we're more into incentivizing people and persuading people to do things that are actually in not only their interest but in other folks' interest, rather than draconian rules that say they have to do things this way without any argument, or with all kinds of penalties if they do the wrong thing. We really believe that people are better or tend to better cohere to social norms if it's something that is something that they're doing because they want to do it, as opposed to something that they're afraid they'll go to jail if they don't do it. So that's our approach to just about everything, but in particular, that's how we view conservation and environmental regulation.
All right, let's talk about Defend the Guard.
Yeah. Okay. This harkens back to my 1972 Peace Democrat roots. Really, I mean, it enables the federal government to play fast and loose and get us involved in all these wars of choice, where we try to impose our will on other people who don't want it. It enables that when we have the ability for them to call up National Guard units from Texas and North Carolina and California and so on. The purpose of the National Guard is to protect people here in North Carolina. I mean, that is to say, our National Guard, North Carolina's National Guard. And they can't do that if they're off in Afghanistan or Iraq or Iran. Not to mention, the disruption for those long deployments have on families and on businesses. We don't believe that that's an appropriate use of the Guard, unless we're actually involved in a declared war. If somebody attacks us and there's a state of war, that's a different story. But that's not the case with any of these wars of choice that different Republican and Democratic administrations have pursued over the past, probably going back to the 50s, the 1950s. So the Defend the Guard legislation would essentially outlaw the deployment of North Carolina National Guard troops to any foreign engagement unless there is a declared war, war declared by the Congress. So would have to be, a serious situation. I mean, World War II, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, I mean, that made sense to declare war and to fight. I mean, they attacked us. And in the case of Germany and Italy, they declared war on us before we did. That we didn't declare war on them immediately. It was only after they declared war on us first that we fought them too. So we want to go back to that situation where it's clear that you don't. The non-aggression principle is central to libertarianism. Those two rules: don't hit folks, don't steal their stuff. Obviously, there's an exception to rule number one if somebody hits you first. But that's not what we're doing as a country right now, and we think it's wrong. We're meddling, and folks that are not in the United States don't like it, and it's understandable that they don't like it. We wouldn't like it if folks meddled with us.
Fair enough. Next, let's talk about abolish the ABC.
Yes, another example where government getting involved in regulating stuff has not gone well. I am not a big imbiber of alcohol myself, but I appreciate the folks that are complaining that they can't get what they want in the ABC stores, and I certainly can appreciate, having worked with some of the folks that are doing the small breweries and beer breweries and hard liquor breweries. They have a really hard time cracking into the ABC system and getting their stuff on the shelves there. So if they had the ability to sell their own stuff, or if there were private companies that are competing for dollars, and they would have an incentive to make their customers happy, which the ABC stores don't, life would be a lot better for everybody in North Carolina. And I wish, instead of spending all this money on administering bureaucratic systems and rewarding people, rewarding either old boys that or possibly just arbitrarily, rewarding one or the other, which is what happens with the current system. We could spend those resources on things like addiction treatment, and that also gets into criminal justice reform too. We have so many people locked up who really didn't commit a crime, right? I mean, there was no victim other than possibly themselves, but because of the way that we treat with drugs and alcohol to some extent, but certainly drugs, those people are branded as criminals. And it, of course, even if they get clean and are in a position to be productive, it haunts them because they have got a felony on their records, and it limits their opportunities. So that the whole system of the way that we control those substances, you as an individual human being have the right to put whatever recreational substances into your body that you want. I mean, there's obviously good judgment and bad judgment there, and we definitely need to be able to have the capacity to help folks that have trouble making those decisions themselves. But generally speaking, criminalizing that kind of behavior is not the right way to go about that.
Fair enough. Next up, let's talk about expanded house market.
Right. This is another example where government has kind of gotten in the way. And, I live in Raleigh, and Raleigh is very blue. And there's realistically no chance that a libertarian is going to be elected to the Raleigh City Council anytime soon. But what we have done in the Wake County Party has done in Raleigh, and to some extent, some of the other localities in Wake County, is to identify and work with folks aspiring to be on the council or serving on the council who have an appreciation of private property rights. When I first started paying close attention to Wake County and Raleigh politics after I got recruited by the Wake County Party in 2013, For the next several years, there was a cadre of folks, and I think it got worse as time went on the city council, who were very um, kind of not invented here, and uh, not my backyard issue kind of attitudes. And they were pretty much opposed to any kind of denser housing because it affected existing neighborhoods that had, nice cul-de-sac type arrangements, or older neighborhoods in the center of the city. Um, the electric scooters came in, kind of like not really paying much attention to what the rules were, and that city council effectively banned them, threw them out. They Bed and breakfast places, the Airbnb. It was actually illegal in Raleigh to have an Airbnb rental. It was not really enforced, but the city council kept promising they were going to come up with rules and put them in effect. That never happened. Year after year after year. It was against the rules to build an accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat on your property. It was against the law to work out of your house in most cases. And that council really did nothing other than to protect kind of the status quo. And we had this system of citizen advisory councils in Raleigh, and those would meet like on a weeknight. And I started to go to my local Raleigh North Citizen Advisory Council, and they had a lot of say in developments. Like builders would come and say, "Hey, we want to build some townhouses," and the CAC would meet and decide whether they thought that was a good idea or not. And often times, well, most of the people that were at those meetings, they looked a lot like me, like, older, wealthier, whiter folks. I mean, people that were, had kids and were doing homework and were renting and had two jobs. And those kinds of people did not show up at CAC meetings, right? They didn't have the time to do it. And so it tended to be dominated by folks who were really into the status quo and didn't want to see change, like the city council. So in 2019, we, being the Wake County Party, we don't officially endorse non-libertarians, but a bunch of us informally worked with a kind of a informal team of candidates who were, they were kind of YIMBY candidates, yes in my backyard, as opposed to the NIMBY, no in my backyard candidates, so that were the incumbents. And they ended up winning, I think it was 6 out of 7 races. So I'm not saying that Wake LP was responsible for that victory, but we certainly were on that side, and we're very happy to work with those folks. And in fact, over the next 2, 3, 4 years, the council did come up with rules for Airbnb. They did come up with rules that allow you to build an accessory dwelling unit. They expanded social areas where you could carry in places like Glenwood South, you could walk on the sidewalk with an open container of alcohol. They brought the scooters back. They did a number of, and they certainly streamlined the process for builders to be able to build more dense housing, which is a good thing for the city. It provides housing both for folks that are at the low end of the income scale, and also for folks at the middle end, who have been kind of priced out because of the low supply of relatively affordable housing. If you're a teacher or a fireman or a police officer, it's really hard to afford to live in Raleigh. You're serving in Raleigh, but you basically have to live in Wendell and commute every day to get to your job because there's just not enough supply. And that's loosened up over the last several years. So that we'd like to see more of that. We'd like to see more denser development, so that folks that are renting or don't have a ton of money can still afford to live in Raleigh, and not have to commute a long distance to get to their jobs.
Fair enough. So how's the campaign doing right now?
Well, I have not been able to spend as much time on it as I would like for a variety of reasons, some personal and some related to party stuff. I'm also chair of the Wake County Party and helping all the other candidates that are running. So that takes some attention. Personally, we are looking to move. My wife and I are looking to move from where we live now to a different house. So, and we've been looking for a year. that takes a fair amount of time. And also the Terrence Everett situation, I think, slowed all of us down a bit. Now that Sieb is here, I think things will kick into gear. But I am very much looking forward to being able to raise these issues over the course of the next 5 months. And I do plan to do more. I did a fair amount of canvassing in 2024. I will expect to be doing more of it in 2026, hitting more precincts and hopefully with more volunteers and, of course, active at early voting, which is a gold mine for candidates, especially those that can't afford to buy TV ads. You actually get to talk to people who are about to vote, which is good. And there's usually lines at those places, so you can actually talk to them for like 2 or 3 minutes. And they're usually bored enough that they'll even listen to a politician for 2 or 3 minutes, right? So that's a plus. We'll have to see how it goes, but I'm hoping I won't get as many votes as I did in 2024. None of us will, because it's an off-year election and turnout will be lower. But I'm hoping percentage-wise to do at least as well, if not better. We'll see.
All right, let's hope for the best. Let's go over social media. Do you have any social media?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, well, I don't know if you got it. I sent you a copy of my business card that's got links on it for Facebook and X and my website, and also a QR code that goes to my website. So, and all of my other links are there too. I have a few other social media outlets, Instagram and YouTube. So I'm out there. Oh, I also have a Blue Sky account. There aren't many Republicans on Blue Sky. In fact, there aren't even that many Democrats locally. A few of them are there, but not all of them.
All right, that's pretty awesome. And since you did show me show me that, would you rather have that be in the thumbnail for this episode? Because how I usually do the episodes is I usually ask AI to generate my thumbnails, because I'm not really that creative of a person. So, would you like to have one of your graphics be a thumbnail instead?
Yeah, sure. If I'll leave it to you. I mean, it's your show. You probably have, a style and consistency that you want to adhere to. So if you think that would work, or you'd maybe like to do something a little bit different with me, have at it. I commend myself to your good judgment in that respect, James.
Yeah, what I'll probably do is I'll just add the introducing part to one of your graphics and then just slap it on there.
Cool.
Alrighty, last question. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to your audience. I will say that if anyone is interested in helping out to promote some of the ideas that I'm talking about, I am looking for folks to help me canvass in northern Wake County and potentially in Granville as well. I'm the only Senate 18 is the only district in Raleigh, the only North Carolina General Assembly district that actually has a piece of it. Well, we have all of Granville County. Have anything outside Wake County. Everything else is contained totally within Wake County. So that's a challenge. So yeah, or of course, if you want to help me, I would like to be, I'm planning to send postcards out to independent voters in my district. And if I got a little bit more funding, I can do more of that. So there's a donate button on my website, and folks are welcome to help me out there too. Anyway, once again, thanks for providing this opportunity. I know that you've talked with some of our other candidates as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And there are still some libertarians out there that I'm still trying to reach out, but they either don't have a phone number or an email or whatever. So
I'd be happy to help you with that. I can help you with folks outside of Wake County too. Just send me the list of whom you need to get in touch with.
alrighty, I'll send you the list either by text or email.
Sounds good.
With that being said, everyone, I hope you all have enjoyed this video. If you all have enjoyed, please hit the like button down below. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Type a comment for any suggestions you may have. And hit the notification bell so that way you can be notified on any new upcoming episodes of this podcast. With that being said, I hope to see you all later. Peace.
Good night.